Welcome back, Fellowship family, to this week's episode of the Deeper Podcast. I am Doug Congdon. This is week 1 of me hosting, and I brought in a whole bunch of reinforcements to help. So we have Brian Trias here. Say hi, Brian.
Hello.
Keelan Smith.
Hi.
Amy Weatherford.
Hello.
Yes, thank you. That was very demure, guys. Well done. Really great.
We have good aura.
You do. And so we are starting the post-Jeremy Win reality here and looking forward to it. Just wanted to say that so Jeremy would listen, hopefully, and then feel bad. So,
Oh my gosh.
reminder, if at any point during this podcast or thinking about this podcast, you have questions for us, you want to give us a quick question of the day idea or anything like that, we have that email address deeper@fbctopeka.com. We'd love to hear from you. Speaking of which, quick question of the day.
QOTD.
We are talking about families raising kids today. All right. A lot of home stuff. And I'm curious because I had to watch some truly terrible shows in raising my kids. When you were raising kids, taking care of kids, what were the shows, TV shows that you were okay with? That when they suggested that they watch, you did not immediately have revulsion, but you thought, yeah, okay, we could do this. Keelan, get in there.
I would say my favorite one that Ashton watched was Wonder Pets. Wonder Pets. We're on our way.
Okay, that's great. I don't know Wonder Pets at all. Wait, do they have?
Cute. It's really
did they
cute.
Have,
It's so cute. They were all little animals, and they were superheroes that saved their friends.
Buy them and have them.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was
Wonder
like
Pets?
very cute. But Ashton went through a phase where he liked to watch talking animals, and we had
think
to
we
cut
all
him
go
off
there.
at some point. And we're like, no more movies with talking animals because they're starting to get to B movies, and we're like, But he loves
this is like
talking
pre-Paw
animals.
Patrol. Was this like a Paw Patrol type show, but before Paw Patrol?
Yes, way
Okay.
before. Yeah.
Okay.
And never mind.
I'm surprised
I'm not that
I
old.
did not know that.
Yeah.
But that is a generation. I didn't have any kids that are obviously that old.
For my oldest nieces and nephews, there was a show called JoJo's Circus.
What is
And
happening?
it was a Disney Junior show. And it
Okay.
was like these cute little circus figurines that were so cute. And I remember like going over to their houses and we'd even play with their figurines. And then there was another one that was called Higglytown Heroes.
What is? Oh, I did not expect to hear a
Yes.
bunch of shows I've
And
never heard
I
of.
could watch those ones. I enjoyed them, but Higglytown Heroes, like, you know, the Matryoshka dolls that stack?
I was calling
That's-
babushka.
I thought that I was like babushka, but then I think that's
But
like
that's
Russian
just
for
grandma.
Yeah. Okay.
So they would open, but like they would go solve problems, and all the heroes of the town, everyday people, were like the little Higglytown heroes. I loved it.
I'm sorry. Did they like pop out of their shell to go be a hero or whatever? It's kind of creepy.
They just were in those, and then one of the like little kids, the purple one, I can't remember her name was, had a squirrel that would pop out of her. She would open, and her pet squirrel would come out and like help solve the problems. But anyways, it's fine. It's normal.
Yeah, totally normal. So normal. What about you, B?
I enjoyed Thomas the Train.
You did.
I can't
I
see
like-
their
Thomas
I like the little
I had to watch it
songs.
so much.
I like them too. I forgot about Thomas. That's a fun one.
That lasted
We
a
had
long time. Then,
We,
Still
because-
lasts.
we had books and we had train. We like, yeah, it was good. The DVDs.
Okay. Well, what
Remember what DVDs were?
I do.
Those things
Actually, all of
all
us.
passed.
All of
We're
us
all about
do.
the same age,
Yes,
so we
we all know.
definitely remember.
I can
the
remember when
DVDs.
they first came out. It was so crazy.
When our kids were very little Einsteins was
Oh, that's
a
cute.
good one. Yeah, and Barney was the one that I had to leave the room for. And then as we've had foster kids in the home, Coco Melon is the new Barney for me, where I can't do it. But like our kids are our bio kids are 8 and 10 right now, and they were trying to find new shows, and they just found one called The Investigators on Netflix.
Our
I think
kids
it was.
like it, yeah.
It was so cute. I really like it. So they're watching it right now and loving it. But what were the shows that you were walking out of the room for?
Caillou. So as a little boy, have you guys seen Caillou?
We know what
I
it
have
is,
not.
but we
Okay,
haven't
a little boy, and he was a brat. Like he got whatever he wanted, and there was
goodness.
No
it's
children
like
should
parents
watch
would
it.
step in, and it would just frustrate me because the mom was like, "It's okay, Caillou." I'm like, "No, he should not be throwing stuff across the room. It's not okay.
Discipline him.
It's not okay."
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that would
But
frustrate me.
he was just a brat.
Okay.
I feel like there's a lot of families out there, and even people that don't have kids yet, at Ben Harwood, that have enjoyed watching Bluey.
Bluey is
I love
so
Bluey.
good.
The
That
dad
might
is
be the
hilarious.
best.
I love that show.
Bluey is cute.
It's like
Never
goals.
seen
Like
that
you
one
watch
either.
Bluey and you're inspired to parent better, and your
It's
kids are
sweet.
inspired to like just be more fun and sweet to each other. So
Yeah.
it's a great one.
I dislike all the shows where they turn to, the fourth wall and they talk to the kids. Whether that's Blue's Clues or Dora, and they're like,
What's the new one?
Dora.
With the orange guy, and he's so happy all the time, but he's just talking to the kids. Oh my goodness, whatever. When
like,
it comes to me in the middle of the podcast,
can
I'll shout it
you
out.
find the coin?
And they wait they pause for an unspecified amount of time. They just start talking.
Yeah, I just
Good
want to say
job.
very mean things to them.
I have been really tired of a lot of the shows that we've just watched a lot, so I just introduced my nieces and nephews to old Reading Rainbow episodes.
That's
Take
awesome.
Because you can find it on
Wait, but
YouTube.
what was your plug? What were you telling me that you watch sometimes with nieces and nephew now? That's Christian biographies. What's that
Oh,
called? What was the
I love Torchlighters.
Torchlighters, which I hadn't heard. You guys heard of that? I haven't heard of that one. Okay, well, never mind. Moving on.
Being
Great.
intentional
Good
in
to
your
know.
home.
This is maturity.
Yeah, good job. Okay, so we are in week 2 of our big series, rolling out strategic vision. This week, being intentional at home. So we're gonna have Brian here, executive pastor who doesn't go by that title. Share the heart and vision of what it means. What's the purpose of being intentional home? What's I should say not the purpose, but what is the cost? Like, why is it so important for us to get this right?
Yeah, well, Joe introduced the series with the 3 spheres, and church is one that we spend the least amount of time in, but we think it's important because we equip people to then go into the 2 spheres where they spend most of their time, and that would be in their worlds, and including work, and then in their home. And home can look different for lots of people. Like some people have roommates, some people live with parents, some people, have just a spouse or there's children in the home. Home can look different, but God has put people in your life. And the most important thing in those relationships is that Jesus is Lord, is that he is the desire of every living thing. And so when we are in those places, when God has placed us in our homes with families, with roommates, how can we have been equipped at the church to go and make him greater in those spaces?
Keelan, Amy, when you think of what's at stake in getting this one right, maybe even in terms of like the dot and the line in eternity, what do you guys think of? I mean, obviously you're Keelan around families all the time. What's at stake?
I think it is God should be first in our lives, right? And that should be something that we should pass down to our kids. And that is a responsibility we have as believers. And it is so important for us to get that right. So we live it out so they can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree with those things. It's just, if my parents had not started a new story, both not knowing the Lord early in their marriage, 2 kids, if they had not gotten it right, I don't know where my life would be. If they had not, God had not gotten a hold of their lives and then be so intentional with us to have something different than whatever they had. And so, gosh, like I want that for others, to know, the beauty of walking with Jesus. And for me, doing within family ministry and with youth and stuff, I'm like, man, if a child can get this early on in their lives, do you know the wake and just the legacy they can start having for so much more than what if people come to Christ later on in life or whatever. And so that to me is the beauty of it, is if they can catch it early and really live it out, God gets to use them in mighty ways.
Yeah.
And so
It's like a compound effect of like what can happen, honestly. And I know Joe's phrase that he used in Run Through, which I think he's going to tweak a little bit, is what happens at home doesn't stay at home. Is that right? Did I
Yes.
say that
Yeah.
right? Okay.
What happens?
And he was saying it changes the world. I think he'll probably say something like it changes eternity.
it does.
Yeah, and if you think about, we
Good
always
and
talk
bad.
about God. Yes, exactly. And Keelan made the point, it changes, eternity for the good and the bad, right? We talk about God, his word, and people as being the 3 things that last forever. And the people that you spend the most time with and have the most effect and influence on are the people in your home, the people that you live and spend every day with. And so getting this right has a profound impact for eternity. whether it's good or bad. So we obviously want to get it right. Pretty obvious stuff, but God has chosen in his sovereignty to use family, to use that as the main vehicle, right, by which discipleship happens. And that is a core part of our children's ministry and our family ministry. So we're actually going to start with the verses that Joe's going to read this week and the verse that Keelan reads every time she does child dedication and other class. I'm trying to think of the other classes that we do.
Yes, trainings, all those things.
So
yes.
Keelan has read this passage 1 billion times, and she's going to read it 1,000,000,001 for us to kind of start with. So this is Deuteronomy 6. Keelan, take it away.
All right. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You should teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, first of all, freewheeling here. When you have heard this verse in the past, what do you love the most about this passage? Like before we get into kind of like transferring it into today.
What I love the most on this passage particularly is it shall be on your heart, and the responsibility that I have as a believer that living that out and what that looks like of loving the Lord, my God, with all my heart and my soul and my might. And am I putting that first and foremost in my life?
That's great.
Yeah, it's not a, hey, memorize this and know it. It's a live it. And like, that's every time I ever go to this passage, I'm like, it's not just like, hey, store it up in your head, but like, it should be so evident in all that you're doing. So
It's good focusing on the relational part. Obviously, as I think about how a lot of the rest of the passage is like teaching it over and over again. And so you think about memorizing it, and you think about how the Jews have lived this out, and it is so deeply rooted in tradition, memorization, and the task part of it, to remind ourselves that the start of this is love, heart, soul, mind. Like this is your relationship is the basis for all of this. So that's both of you combined, that's a good reminder. Anything that you especially love about this?
No, I would say we can't give what we don't have. And so I think it has to begin with each individual. So it's a good reminder.
Yeah. We'll talk about some of that a little bit later, but I wanted to spend some time, the kind of practical ways that Moses talks about this, that God talks about this through Moses, is to sit, when you talk about it, when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. And granted, these are merisms, is that's what it is? I think where you give, examples of two things, and it's supposed to include everything in between. So this really is a picture of all the time. But I think it'll be fun for us to take each of these 4 concepts and move them into today's world and culture and figure out what it would look like for us to do this with the people in our homes. So when it says talk of them when you sit in your house, what would that look like for us to have spiritual conversations, talk about loving and knowing the Lord our God when we sit in our house? This is maybe an easy one, but give me some examples of good times to do this, good ways to do this.
One of the best times, I think, when you have... So this changed in our house depending on Ashton's age. And so obviously when sitting in your house, I think one of the best times was dinner time when he was little, did not have a schedule, didn't have, there was constant FaceTime.
Yep.
So dinner time was always the best time to talk of. And we, just as things came up as he got older, I think, when he'd talk about something, a lot of times he liked to talk late at night. And so that meant as parents, we have to be on late at night. But that's when things just started coming out. And I think that from that perspective is, hey, we're going to have this conversation. And what does this look like as you're following the Lord and guiding those decisions that way?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Did you tell me that, did he used to like come in at bedtime basically?
Yes.
And then it was like, now's the time I want to talk about everything?
We would be ready to go to bed. And Ashton was like, this is when we need to talk. And for a moment as a parent, I'm like, and then I'm like, no, I got to be on.
Got to cherish it.
We have to be on. He is a nighttime talker, still is.
So sit in your house. My first thought is dinner time too, especially when you have little kids. It's like a time that they're trapped if you have them in oh my gosh, I wanted to say car seats. What do you call them? High chairs or whatever.
chairs.
That's beautiful, but it's a rare time where we're all sitting looking at each other in the face. But I'm curious, did you guys have any other times where you were literally sitting and just being able to talk, or maybe it's, if we're talking about intentionally teaching, maybe it's a devotional time that you're sitting around and doing that?
In our family growing up, when it was like spring and summer and just like nice weather, maybe some parts of early fall, for some reason we would all just go sit out on the porch. And like if even older siblings were home from college or whatever, and we would play Father May I, and my dad would like have the kids go out and like, Father May I, yes you may, you know, whatever. And we'd play that. But then
Brian is tilting his head like he's never heard of this. Have you heard of Mother May I?
Mother, may I?
Wow.
So
okay,
like,
yeah.
Take 2 steps.
Remember Brian's childhood was,
because he would say like, Brian, take 3 steps, and you would have to say, Father, may I? Because if you just took your 2 steps, you have to go back. And so we'd play this game, but then we would sit on the porch and like, just, I remember us like singing songs together, like Christian songs, parents like just kind of sharing stories of their journey with Christ. Like mom would read books, but it was always this very intentional time that I still, if I could have anything,
crazy.
I would go back to the porch and just, even as the older kids, because there was always an intentionality, like, and like dinner time, we did not miss. Like people, like, and Sunday dinners especially were really special. And I just, like, I can remember specific conversations. And then, yeah, I think my parents would have agreed, like as kids got older, it was once the little kids were in bed, which they both would come in and we would pray and talk and whatever, and then they'd put kids to bed. That's when the teenagers or the college age would come and just sit and chat with them and whatever. But I just remember lots of conversations at different times. I loved waking up early because that was when mom had her like time of prayer and in the word. And so there were certain kids that would come out and bring their Bibles, but really I just knew it was like time that I could ask my mom questions or whatever. So, I mean, it's just, you just remember those little unique times of just them living it out.
And the porch thing sounds amazing. That's incredible.
I really don't have anything to add. I would say mealtime, and then it's easier to have conversations when it's 1-on-2 or 1-on-1. When it's 2-on-2 and 3, I mean, we would have to set a tone of like, hey, this is the topic, and we're gonna talk about
When
this.
each other
and-
talk, you have to be quiet.
And you have to get it in quick, and once the insults start flying, like, it's
No.
I can imagine.
But I mean, it's basically face-to-face time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It started most at dinner time,
Yeah. Okay.
mealtime.
Okay. So number 2 is when you walk by the way. So what does that look like? What has that look like for you guys? Because obviously we don't do a lot of walking generally these days.
In the car. So we had, when Ashton would I drop him off at school, that was something that I was really intentional about because I knew he was stepping out of the car into the school. And so something that I always said him, and I still do, I would always tell him, remember who you belong to. And that wasn't to me. That was to the Lord.
What a flex. What a parenting flex, though,
Totally.
if you meant to me.
But
Remember
I also
who
didn't
you belong
yes,
to.
remember. But no, and it wasn't necessary. It wasn't a you need to behave a certain way. It was remember where your identity is. And so that was more, and I would always tell him I loved him, and the car was just a natural way for us to have good conversations, where you're, even though you're not having eye contact, it's just a good
Which, by the way, sometimes it's easier for, I'm just throwing guys under the bus here, to talk when they don't have eye contact, right? When they're like, when you're just both facing the same direction or whatever.
And some of that's personality too.
Yes,
Yes.
true.
My wife would tell you one kid is a chatterbox in the car, wants to talk the whole time, and one just doesn't want to say anything. And it's not the ones you'd expect.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so it's a great place to talk though, because you can't
It
go
is,
anywhere.
again, trapped.
Yes.
Yeah.
worship music too.
Yes.
Like
Good.
I mean, there's different ways that you can
Yeah.
have contact in the car.
Or the,
Yeah, kinda-
or the deeper podcast.
Hey-oh, gosh. That makes me nervous. Yeah, but spiritual influence like that. But yeah, there's multiple ways you can have spiritual influence in the car, whether it's radio or
Now, I
What you're
picture
listening to.
picking up nieces and nephews, whether they were like in car seats and us talking, or now like hanging out with during COVID when everything was shut down. all the older nieces and nephews were in high school at that point, and or like early like late middle school. And I remember they crashed at my house, but I remember us literally being like, gonna be rebellious and drive. So we literally drove like 24 highway and just were having good conversations and stuff because you could.
Yeah.
And so being just those intentional moments of when you have them, like, don't waste that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we'll talk about that next. So lie down. When you lie down, this one's easy. I'm talking bedtime here. Talk about how you have memories of your own bedtime being a sweet time, and or like when you're putting kids or nephews, nieces, anybody to bed. What are your traditions or habits?
I don't remember any of bedtimes when I was a kid.
Okay.
Not a single one.
Keelan, I don't know if you listen to the podcast a lot, but whenever Brian talks about his childhood, despite the fact that I think he had a good childhood, it's always just like a
I don't remember anything about my childhood.
Sorry, what were you saying, Keelan?
Sports scores.
I just remember my grandma, when I would stay with her, she had that I lay you down to sleep. I pray the Lord. And I remember reading that on my wall, or that the room I slept in, and I'm like, that's kind of creepy.
It is so dark. I pray the Lord my soul to take. Like when if I don't wake up.
As a kid, I'm like, what?
Yeah, it's
But,
Put that on your kids' walls.
that's what so Keelan remembers that creepy memory from bedtime. Okay.
I'm sorry,
Amy,
I'm not
please
helpful on this
rescue us
one.
with a good one. Yeah.
I will remember, like, just literally last week, somebody posted a picture of their 3 little kids on her husband's back, on his
that's
hands
adorable.
and knees, taking them back to their bedroom for
headed to bed.
bedtime.
Yeah.
And I was like, I literally was like, oh my gosh, that brought
I
tears
used to do
because John Weatherford, when there weren't like 10 of us, but like once my 2 oldest brothers were too old, like Steve and Mike and I would be like, get on their back. And he would do that. And then
That's awesome.
Chris and them were like, wait, he was an old man by the time we had him. But he would do that. And then we would just like, we haven't said our prayers yet. Because the boys were in one room and like you could hear him coming. And then we would just, and he, like, I can just remember like these sweet little moments of prayers, and I still probably could list off all the missionaries we prayed over and like the different people that we knew. Like it just, those were sweet times. But I just remember like you could hear the foot, and you're like, he's coming, and like that just eagerness of like Dad's gonna come in and tuck us in, which for it was sweet.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard from I get to have a lot of conversations with dads about spiritual influence in the home, and I think a majority of them would say the easiest time for them to be spiritually intentional is bedtime. There is another sense in which the kid is trapped, so I think we're finding a theme here, but there is a natural time where a lot of prayer has happened throughout the years. Even if you're not from a super spiritual family, a lot of families just do that. And so this is a good on-ramp for people, especially for dads looking for like initial conversations and prayer time with their family, I think. So, yeah.
And a little beyond just the spiritual, it's just a great time to like settle any accounts at night, and to let them know that you love them and you're proud of them. And it's easy is not the right word, but it's a ready-made time for parents to take advantage of.
Yeah. As opposed to this fourth one, which is when you rise. And the morning is, as we know, the worst time
Especially
ever.
with teenagers.
No, but what does that look like? Either, you guys growing up or doing it yourself for others when you rise.
We've had really fun seasons. Like we had one of Ben's middle school years. I don't remember which one it was. We would, get up and get breakfast, and then we'd each do our like daily reading there at the table, and he'd ask a question and I'd ask a question, and it was good.
That's awesome.
But it was one of his middle school years, not both of them. It's hard to do regular things in the morning, especially when you're going in multiple directions, especially when people don't want to wake up at 5 something to do it, So
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I
What
feel
about you
like with 10 kids and whoever else was at our house and stuff, what I remember are Saturday and Sunday mornings,
Gotcha.
which usually meant Mom was running around with her head cut off, like just doing, like getting everything. But Dad was like in the kitchen, like feeding people and singing and just being goofy. And
Nice.
just that's what I remember is just like him being more present in those moments, because growing up, like the rest of the week, he was heading off to work and Mom was just the presence. But on those 2 times, Dad was
That's sweet.
Yep.
the present one. In
And
the kitchen.
you've talked consistently and already mentioned here that your mornings with Mom, and you woke up early, when
Yeah.
you woke up early and Mom was already up early, are always doing devotions and praying, that was sweet too at times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So mornings for us, I would say is probably our more rush time. But I would get up before everyone, but that was just my routine.
Right.
And so our main conversations were then in the car.
I was about to say,
Like that's kind of
now that that our schedules have changed, or you drive, if you're driving your kids to school, maybe the early morning looks like just chaos, and then you're sitting, breathing,
car.
slowing down, and then you can pray in the car, and then you can.
Yep.
So there is especially in the Psalms, obviously David always talks about starting your day with the Lord, and we talk about that being the best time for devotional time. There's an idea of like dedicating your whole day to the Lord and like starting well. But for me, I wake up after my wife and kids. And so my time of getting starting them well is generally our conversations either before they leave in the car, or if I'm driving them, then we always pray and talk about the day. But yeah.
And this is a little bit of a different take, and it's not to try to unspiritualize it.
Yeah.
But if they don't know you love them, they don't probably want to hear about what you
Yes.
think they should do about Jesus. And like really easy stuff to do in the morning is you can pray for their day. You can, hey, what do you have going on today? Hope you have a good day. Hey, I love you. Like Jake and I, when he gets out of the car, it's still, I love you every day, both ways. And you can use those times, even if it's not like, well, we have a devotional in the morning, we have a devotional in the evening. It's how are you building relationships so that when you need to have some of those harder conversations or more in-depth conversations, you have built the
A
foundation.
really
for
solid
it.
foundation
Yes.
for it. Yeah, that's good. So part of what the goal will be at the end of this week. So that's the kind of the 4 ways covering all. The point is all of life. Did any of you guys do notes and like get notes and lunches, or write notes for your kids' lunches or any of that stuff?
yes.
That's something I have failed at miserably, but
My
think is so
brother-in-law
sweet.
does it really well. Willie does, and I'm like, I cannot even imagine my father ever doing that. So
But it's such a good way, because
It is
then
so
I'm
sweet.
thinking you have this morning time, and then for, vast majority of people, they're sending their kids off to school, and then there's like an 8 to 9 hour chunk or something where it's like you're not around your kids, so it's tough to have an influence on them in those hours. But like, a lunch note or so, there's ways to do it. I just don't do that very well.
So even for Ashton being in college, I still sent him a text
Yeah, there you go.
weekly to some type of, hey, proud of you and love you, and a little prayer or a scripture for him that week. And so there's still those little connections that you can carry over into as they grow too.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's good. So goal this week is for people to leave, and Joe said to kind of start one thing. And I'd say for people out there, I would guess, there's a good number of people in our congregation who are doing something already. So maybe instead of starting, it would be adding, like can you do one more thing? Or I don't know how you would say that well, but
That next
step, right? Yeah, that's our language around here. So Joe has, at the end, kind of his language is we need to make 3 moves. And so those are move from a day to daily, a dream to routine, isolated to connected. Again, hopefully if you're listening to this, you've already heard the message, so you know what those mean. But in the quest to make those shifts and make those moves, what do you think the most common pushbacks, hurdles will be to you doing this well, or to our, the people who are going to be listening doing it well? What are the challenges?
I mean, I think it comes down to priority,
Yep.
to be honest. And I think a lot of people are like, man, this sounds great. I absolutely, and as soon as basketball season's over, I will make sure to get on that. And we know that right
Well
after
said.
basketball season goes baseball season, right? I mean, it's just, it requires a shift in priority to going, you know what? Even if my kid gets a Division I scholarship, if they don't know Jesus, like it's worthless to some level, to a lot of levels. So I think that priority of going like, no, I am in my house to reflect Jesus to them. How can I be intentional when I'm there in the small things, in the daily things, the routine things? But I've got to keep that end in mind, that goal in mind.
Yep.
So
That's good.
Yeah, I think kind of what Brian said as well, of at one point they're not going to be in your house anymore. And the understanding of the end game of what that looks like as you're raising them and putting that as priority of showing them who Jesus is on the day to day. I also think of just, I don't want to say the word laziness, but I do.
But I just did.
But taking the time to get to know each child in your house individually and not cupping them all together, because God created every single one of us differently, and really being intentional with getting to know each child, each phase, and understanding who they are.
Which lines up really well with Brian's example that I immediately resonated with, which was I did this Bible study. It was Ben, right? I did this Bible study with Ben for a year, and it was a great season. And for so much of parenting, it feels like we start something and it goes well, and it's a season, and then it ends. And sometimes we'll look back and be like, man, I feel like maybe I really should have continued to do that, or that I expected that to look that way for forever, and now it doesn't. And the reality is you're going to have different seasons, different kids, different ages. So you kind of need to continually ask yourself the question in this stage of life, with the schedule that we have now, how do I continue to prioritize in a way that makes sense for my family? And so we want to give freedom to families to know, like, it's not going to look the same for everybody. And your standard should simply be basically, what is the next step that I can make in being the spiritual voice of reason and discipleship in my home. So just want to throw that in there. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and not to go all the way back to the beginning of where we started, but if it's just that study, right? If it's just like, we got this book out and we did this book, but like the rest of your life does not line up with that. At some point, your kids are going to look back at that and go, it wasn't worth it to you. Why should it be worth it to me? And so that if it's not in you, that having those things be upon your heart, like if you are following and pursuing Jesus, even if you don't do the study, or you don't pray at every meal, or you don't do all those things, the entirety of your life is going to bear more fruit and weight, I think.
For them. Yeah.
Yeah, as well, like Joe will use the passage from 3 John 1:4, like, no greater joy than to see like my children walking in truth. And I know that was always written on walls in our family, but I mean, even as an aunt, that for me, I'm like, man, I want to see each and every one of my nieces and nephews not just know Jesus. I don't want them to be good kids. I don't want behavior modification. I want them to know Jesus and live in that and go be a light wherever God has them. And so like, that's my constant prayer. And so it makes me step up. Like when I have an 8th grader staying at my home, the conversations we're having, and I want them to see it first and foremost in my life, and not I put on an act when they're there. But like, I think that's part of it, is when parents are real and vulnerable. And I mean, I see this in all of your guys' lives, but the people, as I watch people parent, I'm like, man, they're honest, they're real, they don't put on pretenses, they apologize at night when they have something they need to apologize. And I really kudos to parents just being authentic, because the Christian walk is not this like straight, easy thing. And you're going to have moments of the flesh, but it's when we're real and live it out in a way that they can go, oh, I've already witnessed somebody doing that. So then when they have their ups and downs, here's a safe person that they know also has navigated it well and before them, and they're watching. And so even in my life, like, I may not have biological kids, but man, God has put a lot of younger sisters in the faith watching my life. He has blessed me with 35 nieces and nephews, and then anybody else's children that I get to come across. So how are we living in a way that is authentic, that doesn't promote behavior modification or looking like perfection? Because none of us will arrive to that here on this earth. But that our heart is for Christ, and ultimately that's what we're living for.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, Amy, because we've, all of us here, we've spent a lot of our career in family ministry, children ministry, student ministry. And when we hear this topic, we are instantly going to children and parenting and stuff. But the people who are going to be listening to this, like, if you're just a husband and wife in a house, like, this is what your goal is in that relationship too, to be reflecting Christ to your husband or your wife. Or if your kids have left the house, like, you still have influence, you still have a role with them. And if you're a grandparent listening to this, like, you have grandchildren, great grandchildren, that you can still be having that impact in those relationships. And if you're a single person living with 4 roommates, like, you have an opportunity to have that impact with the people who are in your sphere. And so we just need to make sure to keep coming back to, like, we are called to reflect Christ intentionally to the people that he puts around us, no matter who they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Do you have anything else? Okay. So I've been talking to a lot of guys who went to the men's breakfast with Ryan Lefevre, and his big push was intentionality with his wife and kids, and example over example of that. And I just have talked to a lot of guys afterwards that were convicted by the pure intentionality of it, like how he goes about it. And I think when I look at the major challenge to living Deuteronomy 6 in my household, it is simply that, like, if I don't come up with a plan, if I don't have a thought, then I will always default to whatever is easiest in that moment. So if I've had a long day at work, then it is us sitting beside each other on the couch just watching TV, right? Which is okay once in a while, but it is not as good as us actually looking at each other in the face and having conversations that are meaningful, right? In the car, if I'm not thinking ahead to how I want to use my car time with my kids, I will just default to, either doing work on my phone or, not on my phone, but, phone calls. I would never do that where I'm distracted, but it would just be unintentional. And therefore I look back and be like, man, a missed opportunity. Yeah. So, it's weird to be like, the biggest challenge is not being intentional, because it's like, well, what's the fix? Be intentional. So, okay, great. I need to do this. I need to choose one thing and just start putting it into practice. But also,
I think Joe will talk about why we need community and why we need those. And I'm not just saying that as the community group director, but but that's the reality. Like, we have to have those conversations. It's what I'm constantly reminding my sisters as they're like, man, you're getting to do ministry. And I'm like, yeah, you too.
Yeah.
You have amazing ministry.
Yeah.
And so, like, how can you constantly be encouraging? Like, I learned really early on as a single woman who was jealous of what my friends had. They were looking at what I had, and I was like, I have to get over myself and be completely cheering on my friends who are just head underwater with parenting and all of this, raising toddlers or raising teenagers. And I was like, Amy, they need you to cheer them on. They need you to maybe take a child away for a little bit and hang out with a kid just so that they can have that break. But
or even be accountable, like have a little accountability where you're like, hey, I need to remind you what's important right now. It seems like you're getting lost in some other stuff.
And so I think just at any point we need that.
Yeah.
I needed people to say that to me, like, hey, girl, you may not have this, but who's coming into your home? Like, what are you doing? And so there's that piece too. We're cheering each other on, and we're going to fail all the time because we're human and we have not gotten our glorified state yet. But that's why we have to just keep reminding each other our identity in Christ. First of all, if we're doing it good, it's not because of us. It's because the Lord is working in us and the Holy Spirit's providing. But like, that's where we just cheer each other on and know that there's going to be rough days, but get back up and keep going, and the Lord's going to provide us what we need.
Yeah. Yeah, Keelan, what were you saying?
I was going to say that sometimes I remember as a young mom that I would read all these parenting books and all this guidance, and I would get so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it felt like, oh man, I am a complete failure. And I just remember those feelings. And so I feel like sometimes when we do hear all these steps, that it's just take one. Just pick one thing, and what can you be better about with that, and then grow on that instead of feeling overwhelmed with all. There's so many books.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so many
And now
things.
that we have the internet too, it's like you can get just drowned.
And you can get on social media and make you feel like
influencers who are the best moms. And
So it just can get so overwhelming, I think, as a parent too, because you hear all these things versus, okay, what can I pray about? And then
one thing. Yeah, one thing. That's great. Guys, thanks for the convo. Love the joined wisdom of how many years in family ministry we have. This is team family ministry, so I really appreciate that. Amy, will you pray for the listeners in our church as we cover this week?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
God, first and foremost, we just thank you for just the constant grace and patience that you bestow on us, and that you love us and you take delight in us as as our Heavenly Father. And it's not that you're shaking your head and like, disappointed again, but that you're continually providing us with what we need. And so, God, I lift up our church body as we continue to grow and learn what it looks like to be intentional in the home. And there will be fails and there'll be mishaps and along the way. But God, would you just continue to provide us with people around us who will cheer us on, but also just continue to give us opportunities. And even when we are attempting and it may not be turning out the way we want, Lord, I just pray that you would give us little victories, little pieces of fruit to cheer us on and to keep going, even when it feels sometimes hopeless. And so, God, I just pray for our church body that we would truly be men and women who are living for the line and not the dot, and that our lives really would be leaving godly legacies, and not that these are just phrases that we use, but we want our lives radically changed by the gospel. And Holy Spirit, we need you to move us into ways that impact this world around us. And so, God, use us, allow us to be teachable and humble as we navigate this. But I'm thankful for each of these listeners. I'm thankful for just what you are doing here at Fellowship, and we give you all the glory. And we go ahead and thank you, and just for the patience and understanding and grace that you're going to give us along the way. We love you. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, church family, for listening to this week's episode of the Deeper Podcast. We'll see you all next time.